So I'm going to be talking about today teaching students to reflect on personal learning. Imagine students can articulate their own needs based on their knowledge of how they learn. Think about the level of differentiated instruction we would be able to provide if students could tell us exactly how they're meeting standards based on evidence that they're learning or things that they could use help with. So, in an effort to show you how I use reflections in my class and how really useful they can be, I wanted to show you a few examples of student reflections and point out specifically areas that show what I'm talking about. So, I always teach students that the first thing they should do is kind of talk about what the project was about. They should talk about exactly how they approached it. They should talk about challenges they faced, and then they should talk about specifically what they learned based on the the process and the standards. So in this particular reflection, which was based on a group project that was done as a skit, the student writes, upon receiving this assignment, I internally groaned. I hate writing scripts and I do not enjoy acting for class-related purposes. She goes on to talk about how the group works together to kind of come up with their idea in this middle section, and they talk about developing the script as a group. And then, even though she was sick, which I thought was particularly awesome, she Skyped in to be a part of what was going on in the group assignment. The real meat of what's going on, though, isn't just the process. It's when we get to this end part here where it says, I fulfilled several standards throughout the process of doing the project. One of them was the Common Core standard used technology, including the internet, to produce and publish writing, to interact and collaborate with others. And we talk about using Google Docs and, really using it to discuss and strengthen writing, as she suggests lower here. And in addition to that, analyze how and why individual events and ideas develop and interact over the course of a text. So for this particular assignment, she was able to definitely meet or exceed some standards that we had discussed in class. And so what you might be asking yourself now is, how does she know about the standards? We actually do spend quite a lot of time in class having students break them down, go over what they actually are and how they function. Another reflection that you can see here is just how this one particular student talks about the challenges they faced and how facing those challenges specifically helped him through the assignment, or helped her through the assignment. It was very challenging and it tested several of her abilities. She talks about having challenges with starting essays. She says, I believe I achieved this standard for locating research because we went to the Queen's College Library and she was able to learn specifically how to develop the information that she needed for textual evidence. Her biggest accomplishment, she said, was to consider who was being written about because of the thesis she developed. And over here, one of the most useful ones, she says, is the peer editing, which works with the constructive criticism. I think that this is another really good example of a student discussing the learning over the course of a written assignment. Lastly, we have a student here reflecting about a poetry analysis paper, and specifically in the beginning here, he talks about what the assignment asked him to do, and this is where I like most students to start. So he said, I approached this paper as something fun. I was allowed to choose the poet that I was working with and which poem I was going to use, and then begin to do the analysis. And then he talks about analyzing the poem, rereading, taking notes, so we get a really good step-by-step process of how he's able to be successful. And then he talked about the challenges of the writing process, drafting and editing. One standard he also talked about is purpose, goals, and audience, which we talked about a lot with the complexity of diction because of the audience. That's something he specifically met. I'm sure something you've noticed in all three of these examples is they make specific references to the standards, and I kind of liken it to the idea that students should be writing these papers like argument papers. Not only are they reflecting, but they're using evidence from their own work to show that they've met these standards. It's not enough to say, I met this standard because I was able to do it. We want to see actual evidence from the text. And over the years, I've actually been able to get students to write even more specifically, citing evidence from their own text. Anyway, I hope you found this useful and you were able to maybe see what student reflections could bring to the classroom. Honestly, I see these, I read them first before I look at the student assignments because I'm really eager to see the challenges they had, what they felt they did well, what they felt they could use help on, and then I have the opportunity to adjust how I teach them based on that. If you have questions, let me know.